Okay, so the same Congress that just added trillions to the national debt is now lecturing the post office about spending too much money. And the guy leading the charge? James Comer. The same James Comer who can't even get Pam Bondi to answer a subpoena. But sure, let's grill the mailman. So this past week, Postmaster General DeJoy sat before the House Oversight Committee, and Comer came in swinging about $1 billion shipping program, hiring freezes, and privatization. But watch what happens when DeJoy actually hits back with the numbers. This clip's about 7 minutes. Pay close attention to how Comer reacts when the math stops working in his favor.
Thank you and the ranking member for always having quality meetings. Mr. Postmaster General, welcome. I have 3 questions I'm going to try to get in my 5 minutes. I want to start with a report, the Office of Inspector General, regarding waste in the Postal Service USPS ship program, a topic that is of significant concern to this committee. The OIG found that the Postal Service has spent over $1.5 billion developing this ship program, and it's something that the private sector already has, the private sector already offers. The program wasted billions. The OIG recommended ending it. Your chief financial officer agreed to end it, but it is not ended. First, do you agree that the USPS should not spend billions recreating programs that the private sector already offers at a fraction of the cost?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. You know, from our perspective, we want to give the customer the best experience. And generally, I would say giving the customer the best experience is dealing directly with our customers. But we have looked at situations where we would have others between us and our customers to do that type of technology work. We're actually looking at it right now.
But then I apologize for interrupting my limited time. So will you or will you not commit to ending this program immediately? I mean, that's part of what we're all concerned about, at least on this side of the aisle, is the losses. We want to protect the Postal Service, but we've got to make some business decisions.
No doubt about it. And I will tell you, Mr. Chairman, that we have not made a final decision on that, but I appreciate the question. We'll make sure to get you a final decision on that post-haste.
Well, let's talk about the Postal Service Reform Act. I worked very closely when I was ranking member with then Chairman Maloney, and that was a true bipartisan bill because there's bipartisan support for the Postal Service. One of the things that we expected when we gave the Postal Service some money to stabilize the books, everything that you're talking about today, we did 5 years ago. What cost-cutting measures has the USPS implemented since the Postal Service Reform Act passed and became law?
Sure. As you're well aware, you know, we transformed the network. We basically went to a typical hub and spoke network, something that's been around for hundreds of years, been used by every logistics company since 1955. Going to that network, so we reduced transportation costs, we reduced number of times that we move boxes.
Did that reduce costs?
That has reduced costs by about $2.1, $2.2 billion.
Well, according
remember, our original projection was 3.6, so we aren't there yet.
Based on the numbers, it looks to me like nearly 80% of the U.S. Postal Service's costs are labor, which is the case with just about every government agency. The biggest expense in your entire budget is personnel. And most federal agencies today have hiring freezes. Why would that not be something you would be looking at to reduce costs instead of asking Congress for a bailout?
We're absolutely looking at that. Now, remember, there's 2 pieces to our network. There's folks that actually deliver the mail. And, you know, you don't want to do a hiring freeze there because if we do that, then we won't deliver mail. From a management perspective, you know, we have not increased the number of our employees dramatically. But as you know, we've brought in the... But
they've increased, and every other government agency decreasing the number, like most private sector.
Yeah, actually, in the last 4 years, we have about 35,000 fewer employees. And we're moving toward more of those employees being pre-career rather than career. There's 2 ways we can really save money here. That's changing our mix of career and non-career, more toward non-career.
You're talking about part-time and full-time, right?
Correct, basically. And the other is overtime, both regular overtime, penalty overtime. You know, those are $100 to $150 million for every percentage point you move them. So that's where we're focused. But you're absolutely right. We have to look at everything. We can't look at just one piece.
And look, we support the postal workers. My grandmother delivered the mail. She spent 27 years as a mail carrier in Red Bowling Springs, Tennessee. I support the post office. Very popular in my district, but people are frustrated with the post office. We all have horror stories from the Postal Service. But what's frustrating to me, and I think many members on this committee, is that it seems like we're trying to do more in the Postal Service in-house instead of privatizing. Even before the Postal Reform Act passed a few years ago, you privatized a lot of the logistics and things like that, that it appears now the Postal Service is trying to do itself. And it's hard for me to believe, as much trouble as the Postal Service has at delivering the mail on time efficiently, that anyone would believe the Postal Service, run by the government, can operate cheaper than private companies that have been contracted with the Postal Service for years. And or I'll speak for myself, I'm frustrated that a lot of private companies that have been doing business with the Postal Service for years have been cut out in the last year or two.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure which part of the network you're referring to. We did, the only thing that we've really insourced in the last year is our local transportation network. And we started to insource that. I will tell you, anytime I can do something better, cheaper, we're going to do it. And that's one area.
It's hard for me to believe you're doing it cheaper from the Postal Service. You've done that and you're asking for more money. It's just hard to believe. Maybe it's true, but it's hard for me to believe, being in Congress 9.5 years.
Well, if you believe our accountants, it's true. There's about
I don't know. If they work for the government, I'll have to think about that.
There's about $44 million that we've saved by insourcing that. But even more importantly, it helps service. So when we use third parties, we have to call them, takes them time to get there. Sometimes they'll show, sometimes they won't. When we have our own folks on site with the trucks, they can move immediately. So what we get is better service at a cheaper cost. Now, that's not to say that there's not plenty that we don't do well, but that is one thing we're doing pretty well.
Mr. Chairman, my time's expired. I yield back.
All right, so let's talk about what you just watched, because Comer walked in there like he had the whole case locked down. He's waving around this Inspector General report. He's talking about $1.5 billion wasted on a shipping program. And to be fair, the OIG did flag that, but here's what Comer didn't mention. So this is the report. The Inspector General found the USPS spent roughly $1.5 billion building what's called the SHIP program, basically a government-built shipping platform. And yeah, the OIG said the private sector already does this. Stamps.com, Pitney Bowes, companies like that have been handling this for decades. Comer's argument is simple. Why is a broke agency spending $1.5 billion recreating something FedEx already offers? And honestly, that's a fair question. But here's what Comer leaves out. The OIG also found that Accenture, the contractor building the thing, had its contract ceiling raised from $750 million to nearly $2 billion without competitive bidding. So the waste isn't just that the program exists, it's that nobody was watching the checkbook. And that's a congressional oversight failure, which is literally Comer's job. Now here's where it gets interesting. Comer keeps hammering DeJoy about financial discipline, right? Talking about how the post office can't manage money. But Congress already gave them a massive lifeline and then forgot to follow up. Let me show you what I mean. So in 2002, Congress passed the Postal Service Reform Act. Bipartisan. Big deal. It wiped out the insane requirement that the USPS pre-fund retiree health benefits 75 years in advance, which no other agency or company on earth has to do. That erased billions in debt overnight. It was supposed to give the post office breathing room to modernize. But here's the problem. Congress never came back to check if the savings were actually being used properly. The agency is still running operational deficits. Costs are still climbing. And now lawmakers are acting shocked that a legislative bailout didn't magically fix a broken business model. You gave them a Band-Aid and expected it to cure the disease. That's not the post office's fault. That's yours. Now, DeJoy hit Comer with something that I think caught the whole room off guard. Because when Comer says the post office doesn't know how to cut costs, DeJoy basically goes, "Actually, we already did," and the numbers back him up. So this is the hub-and-spoke overhaul. The USPS completely restructured its logistics network. Instead of the old system where every facility shipped directly to every other facility point to point, they consolidated everything into massive regional hubs. It's the exact same model FedEx and UPS have been using for decades. And according to Postal officials, this shift has already saved over $2 billion in transportation costs alone. They cut redundant truck routes. They moved volume from expensive air freight to ground. And yeah, there were growing pains. Some regions saw temporary delays. But this is exactly the kind of reform Congress keeps saying they want. Cut costs, modernize the infrastructure, run it like a business. DeJoy did that, and Comer just glossed right over it because it doesn't fit the narrative that the post office is just lighting money on fire. And then Comer pivots to hiring. He wants a freeze. Across the board. Just stop hiring. And this is where DeJoy basically looked at him like he'd never mailed a letter in his life. So here's the reality. Labor costs make up nearly 80% of the USPS operating budget. That's a massive number, and Comer knows it. So his pitch sounds logical on paper, right? Freeze hiring, cut the payroll, save money. Except the vast majority of those employees are mail carriers. They're the people who physically walk to your door and hand you your mail. If you freeze hiring carriers, mail doesn't get delivered. It's that simple. DeJoy's counter is actually smart. Instead of a blanket freeze, they've trimmed management, they're cutting overtime costs, and they're shifting the workforce mix away from expensive career positions toward more flexible staffing. It's not as sexy as screaming about a hiring freeze on cable news, but it's the approach that actually keeps the lights on. Now here's the part that really exposes the whole ideology over evidence thing, because Comer's been pushing privatization for years. Outsource everything. Let the private sector handle it. But the post office tried that. And guess what happened? So for years, the USPS outsourced its local transportation to private trucking contractors. Congress loved it. Private sector efficiency, free market competition, all the buzzwords. But the actual data told a completely different story. The third-party companies were driving up costs and creating logistical bottlenecks. So the post office did something radical. They brought it back in-house, used their own employees, their own trucks, and the result? $44 million in savings, better response times, more flexible routing, more reliable service. So when Comer sits there and says the USPS should stop insourcing and go back to private contractors, he's literally asking them to spend more money for worse results because it fits his political preference. That's not fiscal conservatism. That's ideology dressed up as policy. So here's what this actually comes down to. The USPS loses $9 billion a year. Mail volume has been cut in half since 2006. Steiner, the new Postmaster General, is telling Congress they'll be out of cash by fall if nothing changes. He's asking to raise the borrowing cap that hasn't been adjusted since 1992. He's proposing stamps go to 95 cents. And Congress is sitting there asking why the mailman can't just do more with less. You cut their revenue, you mandate their costs, you restrict how they invest, and then you act surprised when they're broke. That's not oversight. That's sabotage with extra steps. Look, the post office isn't perfect. Nobody's saying that. The SHIP program was a mess. The electric vehicle rollout is behind. There are real problems. But when the people responsible for oversight are the same people who created the regulatory straitjacket that's strangling the agency, maybe the hearing should start with a mirror. That's the whole thing. If this helped you see what's actually going on, hit the like, subscribe, share it with someone who only reads the headlines. I'll see you in the next one.